This cop slapped a random woman at exactly 1:17 p.m., and by 2:58 p.m., he has lost his badge, his gun, and every certainty he had built his life upon. He thought he had stopped a nobody as usual, or as the case may seem. He had no idea what was coming for him was bigger than what he could ever imagine. After watching this video, you will never look at a quiet person the same way again. Because the most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one, it's the one that has decided not to speak yet, but has the power to make a police chief beg for mercy. This is the story of what happens when arrogance mistakes discipline for weakness, and a uniform for the only kind of power that matters. Before the story begins, take 1 second to support the channel. Our goal is to reach 5,000 subscribers in the next 30 days, and every single person who subscribes and comments where they're watching from will get a shout out when we hit that milestone. So hit the subscribe button, drop your city or country in the comments, and you might see your name featured in our next videos. Let's begin our story. The sandwich with pork tastes better than ever, it was almost worth the drive. That was the thought Lavonne McDougal was holding when the bell above the door chimed and the air in Riverside Gas and Grill changed. Not in temperature, not in sound, but in the particular pressure that a certain kind of man carries ahead of him like a bow wave. She didn't look up. That was, apparently, a problem. The counter ran the length of the back wall, cracked vinyl stools bolted every 2 feet, a glass case of rotating pies that no one ever bought. Lavonne sat at the far end, tracksuit damp at the collar from the 6 miles she'd run along the waterfront before stopping here. The sweet tea was good. The ceiling fan overhead turned slowly, moving the heat without defeating it. Gloria, the owner, was behind the register, a woman built like a tugboat, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to go quiet around certain kinds of trouble. The man's boots were loud on the linoleum. He stopped 2 stools away. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands on his belt and his chest pointed at her like a question she hadn't asked. Lavonne took another bite. The booth behind her emptied fast, a couple sliding out with the coordinated instinct of people who recognize the weather. You waiting on somebody? She finished chewing. Set the sandwich down with the deliberate care of a woman who had learned, over 24 years, that the most powerful response to provocation is tempo. She turned to look at him. His face was the particular red of a man who expected to find fear in someone else's eyes and had found something else entirely. "I'm waiting on my check," she said. "Is there a problem, officer?" The way she said officer, level, unadorned, calibrated, his jaw moved. "ID. I went for a run. I don't carry it. Receipt for that food." Gloria's standing right there. "She's fine, Tom," Gloria said from the register, her voice pitched low and careful. "She's a regular." He didn't acknowledge Gloria. He never did. "Step outside." "On what grounds?" "Grounds of I said so." His hand closed around her upper arm. What happened next lasted 4 seconds and contained the rest of his life. She rose from the stool, pulled back, not violently, not desperately, but with the clean, rooted force of a woman who had trained her body for decades and knew exactly how much strength she was choosing not to use, and said, in a voice that did not rise, "Do not put your hands on me." The sound of the slap was the loudest thing that had ever happened inside that building. Gloria's glass hit the floor. In the chips aisle, 2 teenagers went stone still. Lavonne's head snapped sideways. When she turned it back, her cheek was already burning, her lips split at the corner, and her eyes were doing something that nobody in that room had ever seen a person's eyes do after being hit. They were calculating. "You," she said, barely above a whisper, "have made a serious mistake." He cuffed her. She let him. The back seat of a police cruiser smells like stale coffee and latex gloves and something underneath both that you never fully identify. Lavonne sat with her cuffed hands in her lap and her spine perfectly straight, and she catalogued. Cruiser number, 4 Charlie 9. Badge ID on the partition panel, 2247. Timestamp on the Exxon sign as they pulled from the curb, 1:31 p.m. The digital display on the dash read 94 degrees. She noted the small pine tree air freshener swinging from the mirror and the crack running diagonally across the passenger side sun visor and the way Blackmon's shoulders sat, high, held, the posture of a man performing his own movie. She had known men like him her entire career. She had known them in Annapolis, where an instructor told her she had been admitted because the Navy had a diversity initiative, not because she scored in the top 2% of her class. She had known them on the USS Carver, where a lieutenant commander once said, within her earshot, that women on destroyers were a distraction the fleet couldn't afford. She had known them in the Pacific, when an Allied commander shook the hand of every officer at the briefing table except hers. She had outlasted every single one of them. The thing that none of them ever understood, the thing Blackmon would understand very soon, was that she had never needed their respect. She had needed their documentation. Every slight recorded. Every violation timestamped. She had learned early that the most durable weapon available to her was the precise, undeniable record of what people did when they believed there were no consequences. In the front seat, Blackmon was already composing the narrative out loud, combative, non-compliant, reach toward my belt, rehearsing the report the way an actor runs lines, reflexively, without apparent self-awareness. Lavonne looked out the window. Her dress whites were in a garment bag in the trunk of her car, parked on Chesapeake Boulevard, 1 block from the diner. She had put them there this morning because she was due at Naval Station Norfolk at 1,500 hours for a change of command ceremony. 200 sailors. The base admiral. 3 cameras. She had been dressed in her running clothes since 11 a.m., had completed her 6 miles, had stopped for food, and had intended to change at the base. She had not changed her plans. The mark on her cheek throbbed with her pulse. She pressed her tongue to the split in her lip and tasted copper, and in the back of her mind, methodical and quiet, she was already deciding exactly how this was going to end. What Blackmon was whistling, some half-formed tune, tuneless really, satisfied, was the last comfortable sound he would make for a very long time. He just didn't know it yet. What he didn't see, couldn't have seen, was that the silence behind him wasn't the silence of surrender. It was the silence before a verdict. The Norfolk Police Precinct on Granby Street processed about 40 bookings a week. Officer Darius Webb had processed hundreds. He was 29 years old, 6 years on the force, with the kind of face that had never quite hardened into the blankness that the job seemed to require of everyone around him. He had twice filed noise complaints about a lieutenant's treatment of detainees that had gone nowhere. He kept a copy of the Fourth Amendment on the inside of his locker. His sergeant thought he was soft. His wife thought he was good. He ran the prints because that was the job. The scanner hummed. The database cross-referenced. The loading circle completed its rotation. Webb leaned toward the screen. He leaned closer. The room was empty except for the two of them, and Lavonne watched him read, watched the stillness spread through him from head to shoulders to hands the way cold spreads through metal, slow, then all at once. He looked at her. He looked at the screen. He looked at the bruise. Oh. Process the fingerprints, Officer Webb, she said. All of them. Mugshot too. I want everything in the system. You're a Rear Admiral. I am. He said her rank like a man who had accidentally picked up something much heavier than he expected. Behind him, through the door, she could hear Blackmon's voice, bright, unhurried, telling someone in the break room about the arrest. The word combative again. The word junkie. A burst of laughter. He doesn't know? Webb whispered. He does not. I'd like to keep it that way for approximately 73 minutes. Webb's chair scraped the floor as he stood halfway, the instinct to act and the order to wait fighting each other visibly across his face. I can call the base commander right now. I can have you. Don't call anyone. The way she said it stopped him the way a hand stops a door. Let him write the report, Lavonne said. The longer he writes, the deeper the hole. Every word he puts on paper is a brick in his own wall. She paused. And Webb, you see the inconsistencies in the booking sheet he filed. You've seen them for 6 minutes and you haven't said anything to him. Webb's silence was its own answer. You already know what he is, she said. You've known for a long time. The question hung between them, not asked, not answered. Webb nodded once. His hands were steadier than he expected. Yes, Lavonne had no idea yet how far back this went. Neither do you, not yet. Drop your theory in the comments right now. Subscribe. Because what Darius Webb finds when he audits those old booking files will change everything you think you know about this precinct. You need to be here for that. She looked at the clock. 1:49 p.m. 69 minutes. Put me in the cell, she said. And Webb, don't let him shred the report. He walked her to holding cell 2 without a word, unlocked the door, and stood in the threshold for a moment after she passed. Rear Admiral, he said quietly. He wasn't addressing her. He was adjusting to the new weight of the world. The cell door closed. The lock turned. And somewhere in the break room, Thomas Blackmon poured himself a coffee and laughed at his own joke. The holding cell was 8 feet by 10. Metal bench. Drain in the center of the floor. One high window with wire-reinforced glass that showed a rectangle of gray Norfolk sky. The smell was bleach and something beneath bleach. The fluorescent tube overhead flickered every 40 seconds with the regularity of a bad heartbeat. Lavonne sat with her back against the wall and her forearms on her knees, and she counted the flickers. Through the door, heavy steel, small wire mesh window, she could hear the precinct move through its afternoon rhythms. A booking. A phone ringing twice without answer. Blackmon's voice at one point, nearer than before, then receding. The particular quality of institutional silence that is not silence at all but 100 small sounds normalizing each other into background noise. At 2:06 p.m. she heard it. A printer. Then a second printer. Then Blackmon's voice saying make sure that gets filed tonight in the particular tone of a man covering his tracks in real time. Her jaw set. She had given Webb clear instructions, stay visible, stay documented, don't let him shred the report. But Webb was a junior officer in a precinct that Blackmon had been policing since Webb was in middle school. The weight of that seniority was not abstract. She had seen it operate. She knew exactly what it looked like when it pressed down on someone younger and less certain. The question was whether Webb would hold. The flicker overhead. 40 seconds. She thought about Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Reyes, who had held under worse pressure than this, and still broke in the end. She thought about the deposition she had sat through in Bahrain, in a room that smelled like this one, watching a man she had trusted revise his memory in real time because the alternative was harder than he could carry. She thought about the two sailors she had buried, Peterson and Abra, and how in their final weeks each of them had simply done the work in front of them because there was no other option. She pressed 2 fingers to the bruise on her cheek. Still hot. That was useful. At 2:19 p.m., the door opened 6 inches and Webb slid a sealed water bottle through the gap without speaking. His eyes found hers for exactly 2 seconds. His hands were not steady anymore. His asking about the booking, Webb said, barely audible. He wants to know why the print results haven't come back to him yet. I told him the system flagged a processing error. He believed it. For now. For now. How long does that hold? Lavonne asked. Maybe 20 minutes. He checks everything twice. 20 minutes. She looked at the ceiling. The light flickered. 39 seconds this time. Something had shifted in the way the precinct sounded, a subtle collective tension, the way a ship's deck crew changes before weather hits, nothing overt, but the body knows. Blackmon was circling. Not her cell specifically. But the building's nervous system was responding to something. Go back to your desk, she said. Act normal. Don't check your phone. Webb disappeared. Lavonne stood. She walked the 8 feet to the far wall and back. She did it 12 times. She breathed through her nose. She checked the time on the wall clock visible through the mesh, 2:22 p.m. 36 minutes. And somewhere in this building, a 22-year paper trail of exactly who Thomas Blackmon was, the pattern of it, the history of it, the names of the people it had happened to before her, was either being preserved or destroyed, and she could do nothing about it from inside this cell. That was the only thing, in 24 years, that had ever felt like helplessness. Webb came back at 2:31 p.m. The door opened fully this time, and his face had the particular composure of someone who has made a decision they cannot unmake. He pressed her car keys into her palm. His fingerprints were cold. I told him the DA's office kicked the booking back on a paperwork error. He thinks you're being cut loose through channels, not through the door. Lavonne closed her hand around the keys. Her car's on Chesapeake Boulevard, Webb said. I checked. The garment bag's still in the trunk. Parking app shows no ticket. She looked at him. Something in his face had reorganized, older, somehow. More resolved. Like a man who had picked a side and was only now feeling the full weight of what that meant. He has a pattern, Webb said. It came out like a confession rather than a report. I pulled the arrest log for the last 4 years tonight while he was in the break room. 41 stops along this corridor. 37 of them are black women between 35 and 55, alone, civilian clothes. 31 of those cases were dropped for lack of evidence or processing error. He paused. Same processing error. Every time. He runs the reports himself and files them the same night. The air in the cell changed. Lavonne stood very still. He has been doing this for 4 years. At minimum. Webb's voice was careful, precise, the voice of a man giving testimony he knows will matter. Probably longer. I only pulled 4 years because that's how far back my access goes. She had thought this was about her. One incident. One bad afternoon and one arrogant man. She was wrong about the size of it. The weight shifted, not from her shoulders, but outward, expanding into something that required more than a badge confiscation and an IA report. This was a system. Not a broken one. A functional one, working exactly as someone had designed it to work. The 31 dropped cases, she said. Do you have the names? I printed them. He pressed a folded sheet into her hand. Before he could shred the drive log. She unfolded it. 31 names. 31 women. 31 afternoons that nobody ever heard about. The false hope she carried into this cell, that this was clean, contained, surgical, dissolved like salt in water. Go back to your desk, she said. Lock that print log in your personal locker. Not the filing system. Your personal locker. And Webb. He turned. What you just did cannot be undone. He held her gaze. I know. Good. She walked out into the corridor, and the fluorescent lights above her felt different now, less like institutional indifference and more like an exposure. Every step toward the exit was a step toward the version of this that she could control. But 31 names walked beside her. And the question she hadn't allowed herself to ask yet was settling into her chest like ballast. How many of them had tried to report it, and what had happened when they did? The door of the precinct swung shut behind her. She had 12 minutes to get to her car, get changed, and walk back through that same door as a completely different version of herself. What she didn't know yet was what Webb would find when he went deeper into those files, and whether Thomas Blackmon already knew he was being found. At 2:58 p.m., the front door of the Norfolk precinct opened. The duty desk officer looked up. His pen stopped moving. The dispatcher across the room, mid-sentence on a non-emergency call, let the sentence trail into silence. A patrol officer who had been filling his water bottle from the cooler by the window turned, registered what he was seeing, and did not move for 4 full seconds. Lavonne McDougal walked in wearing dress whites so clean they seemed to generate their own light under the precinct's fluorescence. The gold Rear Admiral boards on her shoulders. The rows of service ribbons, 24 years of them, above her left breast pocket, arranged in the precise hierarchy of her distinction. The combination cover set at the regulation angle. Her posture a single uninterrupted vertical line from crown to heel. And on the left side of her face, dark purple now against her brown skin, swollen at the cheekbone, split at the lip, the bruise that Thomas Blackmon had put there 93 minutes ago. She had not covered it. She walked to the duty sergeant's desk, set a printed copy of her service record on the counter with one hand, and said, in a voice calibrated so that every person in the building could hear it without her ever raising it. I was unlawfully detained, assaulted, and falsely booked by Officer Thomas Blackmon approximately 90 minutes ago. I am Rear Admiral Lavonne McDougal, United States Navy. I am requesting your commanding officer, your Internal Affairs Department, and the duty judge advocate. In that order. And I want Officer Blackmon present for all 3 conversations. A beat. Please don't make me ask twice. The duty sergeant picked up his phone with the speed of a man prioritizing self-preservation. Someone called Blackmon's name down the hall. He came out of the break room with the casual stride of a man expecting nothing. Badge polished, collar straight, coffee in hand. He turned the corner. He stopped. The coffee tilted in the cup but did not spill. His face ran through its expressions the way a circuit breaker runs through its sequence before tripping. Confusion, recognition, the slow seismic understanding that something irreversible had already happened before he walked into this hallway. She was the woman from the diner. She was wearing a flag officer's uniform. The bruise on her face was his work. Officer Blackmon, Lavonne said. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I gave you every opportunity to walk away, she said. At the diner. In the car. At booking. You chose, each time, not to. She extended her hand, palm up, open. Your badge. Your service weapon. Now. Blackmon stood at the edge of everything he had built in 22 years. One hand holding a coffee cup. The other shaking. What would you have done in that room? Comment right now, because what Webb is about to bring out of that filing room is going to change every verdict you think is coming. Subscribe. You cannot afford to miss what happens next. His hands moved to his chest. The badge came off with the mechanical quality of a man operating on system override. The holster unclipped. He laid both on the counter with the slow carefulness of a person who is trying to make the moment last because they understand it is the last moment of one version of their life. Lavonne picked up neither. She left them on the counter and turned to the duty sergeant. Find Officer Webb, she said. He has something to show you. All of you. The folded paper with 31 names was already in the duty sergeant's hand before Blackmon understood what was happening. 31 names. 31 women. The room understood before Blackmon did that this had never been about a single afternoon. The watch commander's name was Sergeant First Class Dennis Pruitt, and he had worked this precinct for 11 years. He was a careful man. Not corrupt, careful. There is a difference, and it is a difference that costs people everything. Careful men learn which complaints get filed and which ones get lost. Careful men recognize the architecture of a man like Blackmon and make the quiet daily calculation that it is easier to work around the architecture than to demolish it. Careful men tell themselves they are keeping the peace, which is a different thing entirely from serving it. Pruitt looked at the list for a long time. Then he looked at Webb. "You pulled this tonight?" "Yes, sir." Before he could. "Yes, sir." Pruitt set the paper down. He looked at the door. Through it, in the hallway, Blackmon was seated, badgeless, weaponless, not yet cuffed, that specific limbo between authority and arrest. His hands were between his knees. He was looking at the floor. "I need to know," Lavonne said from the window. She had moved there, facing out, the afternoon light catching her shoulder boards, "how long this precinct has known." Silence. "Sergeant Pruitt." He did not answer immediately. That was its own answer. Webb looked at Pruitt. The shape of something shifted in his understanding, not surprise, but the confirmation of a suspicion he had carried for 2 years without ever voicing it. He remembered a complaint he had processed 18 months ago, a woman named Deloise Merchant, 51 years old, who had filed an account of being grabbed and threatened by a male officer whose description matched Blackmon precisely. The complaint had been entered, filed, and then reclassified by someone with supervisor-level access as unsubstantiated, no further action required. Pruitt had supervisor-level access. How many of these 31 women filed reports? Lavonne asked. Webb looked at the list. He had anticipated the question. 11. How many went anywhere? A pause that lasted exactly as long as a man deciding whether honesty or self-preservation is cheaper. None, Pruitt said. The word fell into the room without echo. Lavonne turned from the window. She looked at Pruitt with the same clinical composure she had worn in the diner, but the eyes were different now. This was not the calculation of a woman deciding how to survive an encounter. This was the assessment of a commanding officer deciding the scope of damage control. "You will be interviewed by Internal Affairs within the hour," she said. "Your full cooperation will be noted and considered. Your lack of it will be noted and considered differently." Pruitt sat down in his own chair as though the air had left his legs. Everything Webb had believed about the architecture of this place, which complaints mattered, which didn't, which men were protected and by whom, had to be rebuilt from the ground up. What he had told himself was Blackmon's individual failure maintained by Pruitt's complicity and the precinct's machinery of silence. "The 31 women," Lavonne said. "I know," Webb said before she finished. "I'll find them." She looked at him for a moment. Not approval, something more durable. Recognition. Every file. Every date. Every name. Don't let anyone else touch that archive. He was already moving. The interview room was small, deliberately so, a design principle Lavonne had always found philosophically honest. 4 walls. 2 chairs. A recording unit on the table that everyone pretended not to watch. The kind of room where the absence of windows wasn't accidental. Thomas Blackmon sat across from the Internal Affairs investigator, a woman named Captain Irene Solis, who had driven 40 minutes from the district office in 38, with his hands folded on the table and the posture of a man who has decided that what he needs is a single good story. Lavonne sat in the adjacent observation room watching through the glass. She was not officially part of this interview. She had made that choice deliberately. The most powerful thing she could do now was not be the accuser standing in the room. She had already filed her formal statement. She had already sat with Solis for 4 to 5 minutes, voice level, answers precise, the bruise on her face answering half the questions before they were asked. What she needed was for Blackmon to talk. And he was talking. He was doing what she had known he would do, what men like him always did when the architecture they had built their certainty upon began to list and take on water. He was constructing. Perceived threat. Combative subject. Defensive response. 22 years without a formal complaint. That last detail, 22 years, offered with the quiet pride of a man presenting his credentials, landed in the observation room like an admission. 22 years without a complaint meant 11 complaints that never became complaints. It meant Pruitt's hand on the file. It meant 31 women who had spoken and been made into silence. Lavonne pressed 2 fingers to the window glass and held them there. She thought about a morning 16 years ago, aboard the USS Carver, 300 miles off Okinawa. A junior sailor had come to her, barely 20, hands trembling, to report that his bunkmate had been stealing equipment and selling it dockside. He was terrified. The bunkmate was a third-year petty officer who ran his section with a kind of casual authority that everyone had decided was easier to accommodate than confront. "What if they don't believe me?" the sailor had asked. She had told him, "The truth doesn't need you to make it persuasive. It needs you to make it undeniable." In the interview room, Solis set a printout on the table. 31 names. Blackmon's folded hands did not move. But his breathing did. "Mr. Blackmon," Solis said, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me the part of this story you haven't told yet. Everything after this point is on record and will not be modifiable." Blackmon looked at the list. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. What came out was not a confession. It was the sound of a man recognizing that the single good story he needed was not available to him, because 31 women had names, and those names were dated, and those dates aligned with his shift log with the precision of a pattern rather than the randomness of coincidence. He asked for a lawyer. Solis closed her notebook. In the observation room, Lavonne exhaled through her nose. The work was not done. It would take months, the depositions, the civil cases, the structural audit of every complaint Pruitt had buried. The 31 women would have to decide, each of them, whether they were willing to walk back into a system that had already failed them once. Some would. Some would not. Both decisions were understandable. Both decisions were the result of what had been done to them. She did not feel triumph. She felt the weight of what it had cost to get to this room, not just today, but across 24 years of being the woman in the tracksuit that nobody important thought was somebody important. She stood. She adjusted the combination cover on her head. She looked at her own reflection in the observation glass, bruise, ribbons, gold boards, and she stayed with it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went back to work. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in March, Officer Darius Webb walked into the Norfolk precinct carrying 2 things, a transfer request to the department's newly formed accountability task force, and a certified copy of the Internal Affairs report bearing 32 findings against Thomas Blackmon, 31 predating the arrest of Lavonne McDougal, 1 encompassing it. He set the transfer request on the new duty sergeant's desk. The new duty sergeant was a woman named Marcus Whitley who had come from the district office specifically because the old chain of command was no longer available to occupy the role. Pruitt had taken an early retirement that was not technically a retirement in any sense that benefited him. Blackmon was awaiting sentencing on 4 felony counts. Webb had been asked, twice, by other officers whether he regretted it. He had told them both times that the question itself was the problem. He did not say this unkindly. He was not built for unkindness. But he had sat for 6 months with the weight of 31 names and understood something that he could not yet fully articulate but could feel in the way he moved through the building now, that the regret he was supposed to feel, the loneliness and professional consequence of having told the truth, was not actually regret. It was altitude. The cost of standing at a different elevation than the people around you. The 31 women had been notified by the city attorney's office. 23 had come forward. 17 had agreed to participate in the civil action that the district court would hear beginning in April. The other 6 had declined. Webb had read each of their statements, every one of which said a version of the same thing: "I just want to know that it's over." He understood that. He also understood that it was not over for them in the way it was not over for him, that some things leave a mark on the inside of you that doesn't show on a uniform or a face, that the body carries what it survived long after the event is closed and filed and given a case number. At Naval Station Norfolk, on that same Thursday morning, Rear Admiral Lavonne McDougal sat at her desk in the command suite overlooking the waterfront. The briefing she had missed 6 months ago had been rescheduled and completed. The change of command ceremony had proceeded, 1 week late, with a brief acknowledgement in the base admiral's opening remarks of circumstances beyond the control of this command. She had not addressed the incident publicly. She had not gone on television. She had not given interviews. She had filed her statement, participated fully in the IA process, attended Blackmon's preliminary hearing in her dress whites with the bruise already faded but her service record on the table in front of her, and said, when asked by Blackmon's attorney whether she felt the arrest had been targeted, simply, "I feel it was consistent with a documented pattern." The documentation is Exhibit 14. The harbor outside her window was the same Chesapeake she had run alongside the morning this happened. The water had the same gray-green weight, the same slow movement, the same quality of light that reminded her why she had stayed in this work for 24 years, not because the institution was perfect, but because the water didn't care who was imperfect and kept moving regardless. She had a meeting in 11 minutes. She pulled the combination cover from the hook by the door and set it on her head. She glanced at the framed photograph on the corner of her desk, not at herself, but at the two sailors standing beside her in it, Peterson and Abra, on the deck of the Carver, laughing at something outside the frame. She had put that photo there on her first day in this office and had not yet decided whether she would move it when she eventually left. She decided now that she would not. She walked out into the corridor. Through the window at the end of the hall, the harbor moved in its slow, indifferent way. A supply vessel was coming in on the tide, its deck crew small in the distance, going about the work of moving something heavy from where it was to where it needed to be. That was the work. That was always the work. The meeting room door was 15 steps away. She walked toward it. Lavonne McDougal finally understood, some marks don't show on the outside. The ones that matter are the ones that change how you walk through the next door. If this story stayed with you, if you know someone who has been made to feel like a nobody by the people who were supposed to protect them, share it. Don't just like it. Share it. Because the 31 women in this story weren't looking for fame. They were looking for the one person who would refuse to look away. Be that person. Subscribe. And tell us, when Darius Webb set that transfer request on the desk that morning, was he the bravest person in this story, or was he just the first one who finally had enough? Drop your answer below. We read every single one.